Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Literacy Podcast. Melissa and Lori love literacy. We have a very special guest today, someone who we have been really been trying to get in touch with forever and ever. So Amy, we are so excited that you're here today. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we are so intrigued by your work. So for all of those listening, we have Amy Murdoch here. She's the Reading Science Program Director at Mount St. Joseph University in Cincinnati, Ohio. And Amy, we'd love to hear a little bit about you. And then Melissa will probably launch into the first question because I know she read about your program and we've been talking about it for a long time, but Melissa is the one who's been asking like a ton of questions about your program and got us interested in it. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start launching the questions at you.
Great. Well, thank you. And yes, I'm just delighted to be here and to talk with both of you. So I am, as you said, the Reading Science Program Director. I've been at Mount St. Joseph University as a professor in the program and the director of the program for 12 years. I was hired actually to start the Reading Science graduate program. And so now we have a graduate program that is fully online. We started as a face-to-face program, but we've evolved into a fully online reading science program. We were one of the first International Dyslexia Association accredited programs. And we've continued that. We've continued that accreditation. We're accredited at the Accreditation Plus level. We have a master's degree, a dyslexia certificate, a reading science certificate, and then for educators in Ohio, an Ohio reading endorsement. And super excited to announce, we just started a doctoral program in the science of reading, and we recruited our first cohort, and that program will start this May. So we're excited to add doctoral studies to our list of programs.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And then I'm also the chair of graduate education at Mount St. Joseph. And we've done a lot of work throughout our School of Education around implementing the science of reading across all of our graduate programs, initial licensure. And then a few years ago, we also did a huge overhaul of our teacher preparation at the undergraduate level. And so I'm super happy to announce that our school is now 100% science of reading and really has morphed into science of learning. It's really infiltrated in a positive way all of our faculty's courses and how we teach not just reading, but how we teach learning to children and to the future teachers. So
that is amazing.
Melissa, are you going to enroll?
Well, yes, I have been looking at that doctoral program.
I know you have.
I have watched all of Amy's videos online about it.
Fabulous people, I tell you. I'm excited to learn from the people in our first cohort. So
awesome. Once Elliott's a little bit older, I'll get more serious.
We're not getting any residuals or kickback from Amy's program either. We're just
very interested.
This is free advertising for Mount St. Joseph Science of Reading program.
So I think, we've talked a lot, Lori and I have talked a lot about how, our programs, we did not feel like we got the training that we wished we had gotten, specifically as we learn more about the science of reading, as like I have taken the letters course, as we've learned more about, curriculum like wit and wisdom. And we're just like, why didn't we learn this? Why did we go to school for so long and we didn't learn any of this? And I guess, my question for you, Amy, is like, how did you all start to transition from, I guess, or even maybe explain like what the normal traditional teacher prep kind of looks like and how your program is now different and how you all got there?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So really, our story starts with our graduate program. And so we had a really fabulous faculty member, Dr. Richard Sparks, which some of your listeners may know because he's a great reading researcher and done a lot of wonderful work in the field. He's always been science of reading. He retired a few years ago from the Mount, continues to be very active in the world of reading still. But he was always doing science of reading here at the Mount. But he was kind of the lone wolf. So he taught phonics and linguistics, and our students would learn phonics from him in a very explicit, systematic way. But then they would go to other professors and learn very different things, learning styles and whole language approaches to reading. So it was really mixed. Our graduate program was kind of floundering. It had very low enrollment. And at the time, our dean, Dr. Myth Obach, who was another fabulous reading science person, said, let's use this opportunity to really create something that is focused on what the science tells us. And so they, at that time, this is 12 years ago, created the beginnings of the Science of Reading program at Mount St. Joseph. And they were looking for somebody to really create the courses and the program. And so I always joke, it's like the only place that would hire me, because I was a Science of Reading person. I was fortunate to always be that. I was trained in that model from the beginning. And so it was like one of those great timing things, because my organization, I was working at a organization that was an educational service center that served our region and did lots of trainings. It was a fabulous organization that was really focused on the science of reading and science of learning. But we were going through some changes, and the organization that was taking us over, I did not like the direction they were going. So I was going to leave my job no matter what, because I just felt like I had to. Well, meanwhile, Mount St. Joe couldn't find anybody to hire because I hadn't been looking. And so it was like one of those late night things that I was looking online. It was like really late to be looking for academic positions. And this position that felt like it was my dream job was found. And so, I was able to be hired very late. And so I began creating the graduate program in the science of reading. And then, for a long time, it was myself and Dr. Sparks. We were kind of the two lone wolves, but we had the whole program. So it was just our program. It was very small. It was just us who taught in it. And then also actually Dr. Sparks' wife, Alicia Sparks, who's wonderful as well. And we really kept trying to influence undergraduate, because both of us did teach classes in undergrad, but still, even with two of us, there was more non-reading science people, and even not just reading, but just people who came from a very holistic approach, constructivist approach to education in general. So even if it wasn't a reading class, it was still influencing how our prepared teachers were understanding how children learn. Fast forward, our program took off, and people really wanted the science of reading. And we partnered with our local school district, which is a large urban school district, and our graduates, did us proud and did amazing things as reading specialists and kind of reading leaders in their schools. And Cincinnati Public really started saying, we want Mount St. Joe graduates, and so it was really powerful. Actually, the superintendent of Cincinnati Public came and spoke at the Mount at one of our we have a summit for people considering education. And she said, you need to do in your undergrad what your graduate students are coming out with, because, this is what teachers need to do. And, it's a big urban district with all the challenges that, urban districts have. And they saw a real value. So that was a really powerful moment. I think when people ask me, how do we do this in our School of Education? I think those partnerships with your local school districts can be really powerful. Because that was a big message. They're our number one employer for our students, and for her saying, this is who we want and we should do that. So that really helped. We also, it was good timing because we had a really wonderful dean who kind of got it and was open to kind of hearing about the science of reading and why this is an approach that could be really powerful for teacher preparation. You guys probably know Mark Seidenberg's book, Language at the Speed of Sight. Yep. There's like an infamous chapter 11, that we talk about in higher education, where he kind of talks about the challenges in higher education. And so I gave my dean chapter 11. We always joke about chapter 11. And she read it and really wanted to understand it. And so that began really our ability to change our undergraduate, because she saw the importance of it, and I give her a lot of credit for really helping to move us towards that. it's challenging because professors aren't prepared that way overall. And so we, as Dr. Sparks retired and we've brought on new professors, it's been very challenging to find professors with that background.
Yeah.
And we have we have fabulous professors now, and we were able to find people and also not just find people, but then also continue to build their knowledge. So, for example, all of our professors have letters training that we've done, many of us multiple times. Many of us are even trainers. But we find that that's really important to continue those conversations. We also all have structured literacy training. We use Orton Gillingham in our school. There's lots of great ways to do structured literacy, of course, but having some common training and common language we found to be really important. And having our dean say, this is important, how do I support this? And to be honest, we had people who left our school, which is okay because it wasn't the right match for them or for us. But that was really important, having that common training and common language, and then having that administrator who is willing to work and do this, do that learning. She's going through letters training herself right now. And really, getting that administrative support, just like in schools, right? You need both bottom up and top down support to make real change happen.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as you were talking. I was thinking, yes, the training and the connected tissue in the language and the administrator support. And then in the bigger picture, when you send them out into the schools, to have that support there too.
Yeah.
I feel like you're just such a learning forward organization. Like you've organized your team into that. I think it speaks volumes that you're still learning and doing that work to learn. And I think there might be like a myth about professors maybe who are like, oh, well, I've reached the highest tier possible. And now I'm asserting all of my learning giving all my learning to my students versus I'm continually being a learner. So that's like speaks volumes to me to hear you say that.
Lori, I think that's such a great point. We were in our reading science faculty. We have 5 reading science faculty members now. And we were just talking about that, and how we have, we always do a book study each year. And then we also read articles. Right now, we're really focused on understanding phonological awareness better. But I think, with a field that's focused on the science, you have to have that model, right? Because new science comes out all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is super important.
Yeah. Melissa, did you have a question? I saw you.
I was waiting for you, Lori.
I know. Go ahead. You go ahead, and then I'll hold mine.
Yeah, not so much a question. I think I was reflecting a bit on my own, undergrad and graduate studies, which I don't do often, really. But just thinking of like how isolated each class kind of felt. And I didn't know that at the time, but looking back, I think back to like, I had an amazing linguistics class, right? It was super interesting and really cool. And I learned a lot of things, but it wasn't connected to what I do in a classroom with that, So I just think like, I'm just hearing what you're saying, Amy, of like being able to look at the whole program and make those connections across is so important rather than having each professor with their thing they teach and letting them teach their thing.
Yeah. And that's hard. I mean, that's hard in K-12 schools, and it's really hard in higher education because we do become kind of siloed just because of being busy. I don't even think it's anybody, intentionally doing that, but it's busyness, right? Yeah. So 3 years ago now, we got a small grant to really look at our undergraduate reading core. And it was so fabulous to get the faculty together who teaches the reading courses. And this is undergraduate now. And we did that work exactly. We said, what are the key content that we want to teach? How do we do that? And what belongs in which class? Because that happens sometimes too. Again, just like in K-12, I really like teaching this, but maybe it belongs more in another class. Mm-hmm. And if I'm teaching it and Jan's teaching it and Beth's teaching it, there's repetition is good, but are we losing important time to teach other content?
For sure.
And those were really wonderful discussions that kind of guided us to thinking about what are the key knowledge and skills we want our teacher candidates to have, and then how do we build those across courses? So where do we introduce? Where do we go deeper? And our team actually was asked by the state of Ohio to create model syllabi, and then we also created a planning tool for higher education. So any of your listeners are in higher education, we used a planning tool, and we used it in our work too. And it was really helpful to help us think through which classes do which kind of core standards around reading. And we based it off of the International Dyslexia Association's knowledge and practice standards. So
that's exciting. I'm thinking like that really speaks to the lens of the student experience, which Melissa and I do talk a lot about on this podcast in terms of students in schools, K-8, K-12. But when we're thinking about higher education students, it's like equally important to have their experience be seamless across the board. But you're right. Like in the past, I mean, I remember my experience being very siloed, and I'm going here to learn about this. And if the classes are coming from the same source, for example, the School of Education, it would make a lot of sense that there is cohesion and that there are not a lot of repetitious things happening, or I'm not going to your class and learning one thing that then contradicts the next class. So it does seem like it makes sense to do that for a seamless student experience, but also so that then students can go and apply this knowledge and skills that they're attaining into the real world in their student teaching and eventually in their teaching experiences.
Yeah, and that's tricky. And that's the last couple of years, COVID caused us a little pause, as everybody. But we've really been trying to focus on exactly that. So how do we teach it? But then how do we make sure our students are able to practice it in the field? And then especially student teaching, having student teaching experiences that reinforce what we've taught them in the real world. And that's been challenging because, as you know, in our K-12 schools, we have work to do to really make sure that there's science of reading instruction happening. And so we've done a lot of work to make sure we get the right placements, but then also think about how we can kind of scaffold for our teachers, people who are becoming teachers, to see that. So they do a little bit in practicum, and then they come back and learn some more from us, because that's always one of the things we say too. It's like before they actually practice it, the knowledge is not as real as after they've practiced it. So how do we come back to some of those key concepts of, why we're teaching this way?
That's a good point. Yeah.
I love that.
But they didn't know the gold we were giving, right? Like they didn't pay attention in the same way. Not that they weren't paying attention, but they didn't really pick it up. So we've really tried throughout our program to have practicum and field experiences, not just at the end, but really scattered throughout, and being very prescriptive about those. So training them on specific things that they can go in and do and see in a real classroom, coming back and talking about them. And then that student teaching experience is so important. And, what we found before we were doing this work, when it was myself and Rick Sparks, and again, it was more eclectic. And there was actually a value in that eclecticism. They actually, not only was it that way, but they sought to have it that way. I remember a dean, not my current dean, but a previous dean who was wonderful, but said to me, no, it's important that we have some reading science and some constructivism. Like that. And I think that's a true value in higher ed. Like it's good to be eclectic. I don't think that it is good to be eclectic, because then you're just confused, right? Dr. Murdoch told me that, science of reading says that, learning to read is very, needs instruction. It's not natural. And then Dr. So-and-so says, no, reading's natural. Just set up. That was what was happening. So anyway, I digress. Having those really purposeful classes, but then practical experiences and then reflections again is really important. And we know we can do a great job instructing, but if they get a mentor teacher who's doing something very different, we know the practice will probably match the mentor teacher, because there's something very powerful about seeing, real teaching in real classrooms. So,
yeah. Man, it makes me want to go back and do it all over again.
I know. I was thinking about that too. I was thinking I'm curious about the field experience and what happens. Do your teachers regress? Are the teachers who they are their mentor teachers using high quality instructional materials? Are they able to use these materials to the way that they're intended? Like, what happens in that field experience that might either support what you're teaching or not support what you're teaching?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the not support just quickly, and then I'll go to the support. But the not support, kind of before we were as coordinated as we are now, and we still make lots of mistakes. So I don't want anybody to think that we've got it all figured out, because of course it's it's got lots of moving parts, and we're still, refining how we train teachers. But
well, the good news is on this podcast, we've never interviewed a perfect guest yet. So you're in good company.
Oh, that's good. So I think, what we see happen that's not good is we've trained them in one way, but if they don't see it happen, then they don't really know how to apply it. So then they really, time and time again, we've seen them really just emulate what their mentor teacher's doing, especially if it's, a kind, well-liked, dynamic person, which is who we choose and who we've always chosen for mentor teachers. That's really powerful. And I've even had, undergrads come back and do my graduate program who I knew had some of the stuff that I'm doing in my graduate program, but they really moved towards a more constructivist whole language approach because of the settings they were in. And they reflected to me like, oh my goodness, like, I think you taught me some of this in undergrad, and I just, I have to get back to it, and totally human nature, right? Where we find that it's working really well now is when we do find science of reading teachers that we place our, teachers who are learning to be teachers with. And we're really fortunate because we did the Science of Reading graduate program for a number of years here in Cincinnati. So we do have a lot of graduates of the graduate program who make fabulous supervisors and mentor teachers. And we try to really place them with those teachers. The other thing we started to do, which I'm so excited about, is we've partnered with a couple of our local schools, and we're going through training with them, with their faculty. So we're doing letters training with 2 schools right now, where our reading faculty are going through the training again, but they're now doing it because we're doing it with our school partners. So that's really wonderful, because then we can have those conversations about our student teachers and say, oh, we're going to place them in your classroom, and we really want them to see some of the things we're learning, and, really kind of create those science of reading classrooms. We also partner with these same 2 schools, and our student teachers, our practicum students, go out and do structured literacy practicums. And again, we use Orton Gillingham, and those teachers can also be trained in Orton Gillingham. And so we always, when we send students out and do the training with our students, our Mount St. Joe students, some of the faculty at the school also goes through Orton Gillingham training. And that has proven to be really powerful. The teachers love it. And then again, our students can see it in action in real schools.
Very cool. I'm going to change course a little bit. Sorry. I wanted to actually back up a little. I was thinking about one of Emily Hanford's podcasts, where I don't remember who it is, but I've quoted it a million times. But someone says, like, your science is not my science, right? And I'm wondering.
Then says that.
I'm wondering, like, how do you all decide what is in your program, right? Like, this is what we want to teach in our Science of Reading program. And you also said, like, the science changes. So how do you keep up with what the science is saying?
Oh, yeah. Wow, that's a great question. So the Reading Science program originally was based on, because our original program was before the IDA standards came out. So we based it on Louisa Moat's Teaching Reading is Rocket Science, which was kind of like the preamble to the IDA standards anyway. And so I think it's nice for higher education to have standards that reflect the science, because it's really hard to, pull all of that together. And of course, the National Reading Panel so nicely laid out for us kind of those essential components of reading. But then the how becomes, the piece of it. So I think having standards that higher ed can look to is really important. But then beyond that, making sure higher ed understands how those standards were derived, and that they've read and know the research that went into the IDA knowledge and practice standards, as my example, or Teaching Reading is Rocket Science standards, which again have morphed into the IDA standards.
Got it.
So, that's one of the really important things the Reading League is doing right now. They're really trying to help us define what the science of reading is. Mm-hmm. And it's, Kenneth Goodman's statement, your science is not my science. That's not science, right? Like there is no my science or your science. There is just science.
Right.
And science
it's like, that reminds me of those flags that you see flying. It's like, science is real. Like I always am like, yes, it is. It's just science. And I always want to learn how to sew so that I can write science of reading is real and that everybody, can see. But yeah, I mean, it's true. Like it's not Amy's science and Lori's science and Melissa's science. There's not three different sciences happening now that we're talking about the one that is supported by all the research that is the science of reading.
Yeah. So I think there's clear definitions of what we mean. So we want peer reviewed, we want things that have been experimentally derived, we want replication. So there's all those things that helps us define science in education or in biology or, whatever field. But I think we also have to realize that science doesn't give us absolute answers, right? There's always interpretation and there's always different ways of implementing. And there's still a lot to learn about, yes, we know some key things, but do we know everything? No, it doesn't tell us exactly everything we should do.
Right.
So I think the other important thing as we're training teachers is helping them to be skeptical and good consumers of science as well. So that we're not duped, right? I think too often, because we're busy, we're duped because somebody dynamic comes around and says, no, this is science of reading. And that's what's happening right now, right? And why the Reading League is doing their good work to try to help have a strong definition of the science of reading. Because, it's like everybody's saying, yeah, we're science of reading. Oh, no, we're science of reading. And then you look at things and you're like, that's why, I don't see how they can say that. And so I think another piece of training teachers and helping us all is to be skeptical and critical and good consumers of research, but understanding those foundational things that we do know that, again, have been nicely laid out in the National Reading Panel and have been updated with additional science, and having an appetite for science. And I love organizations that are trying to make that more relatable to teachers. Teachers don't have time to read scientific studies of reading research. That's hard for any of us to read. It's important, but we also need good people to help us kind of make that translation of the science so that teachers can have access to it. But at the same time, having that skepticism and criticism of like what's coming at us in a way that's helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that critical consumer piece is key. And I do think that after years and years and years of teaching, like new teachers might be willing to be more open than a teacher who's been teaching for many years, because likely in those many years of teaching, they might have been handed something that's like Common Core State Standard aligned and, here, do this. And then pedagogically, I don't know what, sound and, the stamps on the box, and then aligns to different learning modalities. And there's another stamp on the box. And, now it's like science of reading, instead of really thinking like this probably is the thing that should have been the thing from the get-go. But that's really, really hard to undo and relearn all of this stuff, a new way to teach, a new way to learn. It's really a new way to think. And it's not new, but it's a new way if it's new to you, like a used car, right? It's new to you.
Well, and so often too, it's not just something new, but it's in opposition to what you thought was
right.
New. And that's so hard. I mean, I've had teachers in my graduate program who, when we were face-to-face after the first class would come up to me and say, Amy, like, I feel like this one class has told me everything I've learned was wrong, which of course is dramatic and not true. But, there's some core things that we have taught people about reading that are unfortunately just wrong. Yeah. And gosh, I really hand it to those teachers who examine that and are able to, incorporate new things into their models of practice. And I think why they do is because it works. You know, that's what I love when I hear my students say this to me, the teachers I work with, is that, you know, the things I learned, I put them into practice, and now my children are reading better.
Yeah.
That's why we're moving towards this. It's not about philosophy or ideology. It's about child outcomes. And when you teach reading following the science in a structured, explicit manner, kids learn to read. And that's the power. You know, that's why the superintendent said, I want Mount St. Joe teachers. It's not because she just likes Mount St. Joe. It's because she saw child outcomes that changed. And I think that's where I see teachers come to the science and want to learn, because they're frustrated. And all teachers want the best for their students, and are seeking those answers.
Do you have any joyful stories from your students that they've shared with you? Like, can you recall any specific stories of joy as a student has, and I mean a student teacher or teacher in your program, either undergrad or graduate, who's doing the work has just been transformed, and maybe as someone listening can resonate, you know, the story can resonate with them?
Yeah. You know, my favorite kinds of stories, I'll tell you like a grouping of stories and then I can tell you a specific one, but my favorite kind of stories are when my students come back to me and tell me how excited they were to help a child who was really struggling. And you're going to make me cry. But, you know, I think so often our children who struggle the most are the children that teachers don't know what to do. And so the teacher gets frustrated, and you almost, it's like human nature. You just want somebody else to have that child. So refer them to special education, or sometimes they're a behavior problem and they need a special school. Like it's a natural reaction. I can't help them. I want them to get help. So they probably need to go somewhere else. And what I always say that is my number one goal for my teachers who are my students is I want them to be happy to have the struggling student. Like I want them to see, like, I got so-and-so, and oh my gosh, so thank goodness they're in my classroom because I know how to help them. And so I get lots of stories that reinforce that goal that I have, and where I hear students say that, like, I'm so excited, Amy, because next year my principal put me in the classroom that has a group of children that are, you know, being included, and I get to help them.
And they know what to do.
Right. And that's just right. That's the joy, is because, I mean, everybody wants to help. And so if you feel this power, like, I know how to help. This child is a fourth grader and a non-reader. Thank goodness they're in my classroom because I can help them. Like that to me is like the biggest joy.
Yeah. Empowering for the teacher, right?
Yeah.
And like, I think too, reflecting on what the teacher may have done in the past, right? Like I'm thinking maybe it's a 7th year teacher. That teacher might've been able to say, like, when I taught 4th grade and I had a group of non-readers before, I might've done things like, look at the picture. Exactly. What is, you know, or, a variety of other strategies that are not helpful versus let's use the letters in this word. And what do we know about language to help us? Yeah.
So my specific story is, so I had a person who was a reading specialist, and she came to our program, graduate program, to get her master's degree. It was to get her dyslexia certificate. She already had her master's degree. So this is a very accomplished person already. And she was a reading specialist, went through our program. And at the end of her first year, she came to me and she said, you know, I have to tell you the story. And I was like, okay, great. So she had a student in her class on her caseload. So again, reading specialist, mainly working in small groups, that she worked with all year and just was not very successful with the year before. And this is, you know, a child who had a lot of behavior problems as well as just really significant reading concerns. And the mom had decided to move the child to another school. And this student, after going through a year of our program, reached out to the mom and said, I now know how to help your student. Please come back to our school. Like, this makes me want to cry. So like, not only did she want to have the student, but she sought him out. And he was a child who had lots of like challenging behaviors as well as, you know, learning concerns. But she knew the reason he was having challenging behavior concerns is because he couldn't read, and it was embarrassing and all that stuff. So she actually sought out the mom and convinced the mom to bring the child, you know, back to their school. The child had gone to a community charter school because the public school they felt was not working for them. So that just made me so happy to hear that, she was recruiting those children. She wanted them so badly because now she knew how to help them. And that's what we want for all teachers, right?
Absolutely.
Feel like no matter who shows up in your classroom, you have the skills and knowledge to help them learn to read.
For sure. Amy, I'm wondering, so often Lori and I even just have these conversations of like, well, why is this just not happening in every why isn't every college teaching this? We just don't understand. And I'm sure there are a lot of reasons, and I don't know, you don't know all the answers to why or how we change things, but just wondering what your take is on like how maybe it's already starting and we don't really know, but I'm just curious of, how do we start getting more programs like yours?
I think it is starting. So I think in the last 5 years even, I've seen great movement towards the science of reading in higher education. I've in our state, and I know our state's not unique, across the nation, states are beginning to have that conversation about higher ed and how do we influence higher ed towards the science of reading. It used to be the non-constructivist, the science of reading person would not be as welcome at some of those meetings. I was somebody who was in those meetings and sat alone at a table. But now
that's really funny.
Yeah. But now I feel like that there's an engagement, there's an awareness that this is important. I think the sources for that are a couple different ones. I think families, parent advocacy has done a lot to put pressures on schools and thus, higher education. So definitely departments of education to do things, especially parents of children with dyslexia. So I think parent advocacy has moved. I also see teacher advocacy moving the needle. I don't know that that's talked about as much, and maybe I see it from my teacher so much. So it's so in my mind, teachers who learn this and they're frustrated. Like, why didn't I learn this in teacher prep?
Yeah.
And they're speaking up and they're saying, yeah, I got my graduate degree. And some people who come to my program, I have people who have 2 or 3 master's degrees and hadn't learned this yet. And they're mad. And they're not mad just for themselves. They're mad for their students, of course. And then I think amazing people, you mentioned Emily Hanford, who have really helped bring light to this. Organizations like the Reading League that I mentioned, IDA. I think there's been a lot of different kind of entities, pushing the system towards this. And I think people are changing. I know in the state of Ohio, we have a project at the state level where they are giving grants to higher education, institutions of higher education who want to implement the science of reading. And I've participated on that kind of the panel that was put together to guide this work. And then I've also participated on it as an organization or a higher institution, a university that's going through this work. And I have just been really impressed with the people who've come to the table. So university professors who weren't trained this way and they want to change. And I think, again, that's a really special person who can say, I have a doctorate, but I didn't learn this and I need to learn this for my teacher candidates. I think that's amazing. True. And I think we need to find a way to support that and to provide them a pathway to gain those skills and knowledge that is respectful rather than, nobody feels good when you just tell them how bad they are and why don't you know this and you should do it differently, right? But if you say, hey, here's some training that you can go through, here's some, professional development, here's some funds to give you to rework your courses. I think, providing them that grace to find a pathway towards this, I think is the way to go. I know states are doing different things, but at least in Ohio, I've been really impressed with the other universities at the table who didn't have any, focused science of reading before this project and are really, really doing some great things to change their coursework.
Good. Yeah. That makes me feel better.
It's very it's empowering to hear about.
Yeah. And there's other states, like I know everybody hears about Mississippi, Colorado. I mean, Arkansas, a lot of states have projects doing things in different ways that are having an impact.
I'm wondering, like, thinking about the programming that is happening, and when we're saying science of reading, we're talking about the many strands that are woven into skilled reading. So we're talking about the foundational skills, such as the word recognition, and then the language comprehension piece, which also includes a big priority on background knowledge. I'm curious if you might be able to share a little bit about how your program supports teachers in understanding, like, the language comprehension part of the rope, and then also how you see that playing out in the field with teachers, because I imagine if there's not high quality instructional materials, that it is a challenge for teachers, and when they get out in the field, it is a big juxtaposition from what they've learned in the classroom with you. And I know we're backtracking a bit, but it was like a lingering question. I wanted to make sure while we had you, I asked all my questions.
Yeah, especially in K-3, right? I think there's an important and needed focus on word recognition skills, but we also know the importance of those language comprehension skills. And, I think to me, a big one is always background knowledge. So, I worry, some of the schools I consult with, I worry when I hear, oh, we teach reading and math all day, and they don't teach science or social studies. And we know that's so key for building that background knowledge, which becomes just key in reading comprehension. So I do worry about that. And we do talk about that. I think that's probably the biggest challenge we have in terms of placements, is really being able to see a school that's doing that balance nicely and having, having language comprehension skills taken care of in a way that we know is important. I think it's hard because, of course, language comprehension skills aren't as they're not as compact as our phonics skills, Yeah. And I know there's debate, but, there is a certain number of phonics skills, and we can kind of wrap our arms around them, versus language, vocabulary, background knowledge. It's big, and, it's something that is a little bit trickier to wrap our hands around, but crucial. So in terms of how we teach it in our undergraduate program, we have courses dedicated. So we have courses dedicated to vocabulary and comprehension. And then we have a structured literacy practicum that is focused on vocabulary and comprehension skills, and writing skills is part of that as well. And in that course, I don't teach that course, so I have to kind of remember. In that course, I know they have specific instructional routines that they teach their students, that they go out and practice in their practicum. And we've tried to partner with schools that are doing curriculum that does do that. And I don't know, I probably shouldn't name specific curriculums, but there are some good ones that, do have those components that really teach background knowledge, vocabulary, comprehension, and written expression skills. So we do try to match that with their practicum. So same thing we do with our structured literacy around word recognition. We have that same model, a course and then a practicum that's connected to it. And then in our student teaching, looking for schools that are doing both and really teaching all parts of reading.
That is really helpful. Thank you.
All right.
So Melissa, I'm thinking we're at the advice part. What do you think?
That's exactly what I was about to ask. We're ready to get our advice from Amy. So we always wrap up, Amy, with our guests leaving our audience with one piece of advice, which I know there's probably a million things you could tell our audience, but if you have one thing to leave our guests with today, what would it be?
Oh, just one. That's so hard.
Maybe two.
The thing I've been thinking a lot about is that whole idea of pressure. So how do we put gentle pressure on higher education to change? And I think it's really powerful to hear from your graduates. And if you were prepared or not prepared. And again, I think it's important to be respectful and to provide, constructive criticism about how to improve your program. But I think one thing your listeners can do if they're classroom teachers or interventionists who are frustrated with their training is to help change higher ed by going back to your institutions that you graduated from and let them know, let them know what teachers need to be successful in the classroom. Yeah. I think that might be another place to put pressure. As I said, I think I see pressure from teachers also changing reading in our country. Pressure from parent advocates, wonderful reporters like Emily Hanford, But I think teachers also can have a big impact. And one of the ways is to speak out if your training didn't help you in terms of aligning with the science of reading and helping put pressure on higher education in that way. Because we need to change things. We need to move the bar a little bit more quickly than we are. It's moving, but I think we can accelerate it by putting additional positive pressure on institutions.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. I've never actually thought about doing that with the schools I went to.
Melissa, we can write a letter together to the one we went to.
You guys have a big voice now, so.
I know. I know. And we don't want to ever like put anybody down, but it is a reality that it is happening in some places and it's not happening in others. And, you know, it was sad that we arrived on the scene. You know, Melissa, what year did you arrive on the scene?
2003.
Okay. Yeah. I was 2004 and we arrived completely unprepared and we didn't know it until a decade later, or, you know, maybe a little bit less than a decade later, but about a decade, give or take later. And it's really hard to think about just as many of our listeners, you know, share with us those kids who we impacted in the interim.
Yeah. And we knew it there. The science of reading is not new.
Not new.
That term might be new, but I was trained in the 90s in it. And, you know, we've known this for quite a long time. So that's why it's time to accelerate, right? Because sometimes people say that to me, like, oh, I'm surprised your program's been around for 12 years. I thought the science of reading was new.
Yeah.
Yeah. National Reading Panel came out in 2000. And that wasn't even new.
That wasn't new then. Yeah. I think there's something dated back to the 80s. I should get it and try to post it on our website.
Yeah. For Project Follow Through, which was a large scale reading research, was in the late 60s, early 70s. So we've known this, but we need to help. We need to help get it into teacher training and we need to help get it into our schools in a stronger way. There's hope, but we need to accelerate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I feel like we should have a podcast themed I Have a Dream and just have like a science of reading dream and just like build out exactly what we would want, like from higher ed all the way through teacher training and then teachers in the classrooms with the materials and then all the way through the teacher experience and the student experience. Like it'd be so amazing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Melissa's like, put your crazy ideas away. I don't have time for it. Amy, we'll work on that.
Maybe next year. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Amy, it was so amazing talking with you. And we've been wanting to just ask these questions for so long. So we're so grateful that you took some time to talk with us and to answer our questions. And we wish you the best with your program. And maybe we'll even end up in there one day.
Yeah. Come join our doctoral program. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope I met your needs and answered okay.
For sure.
You did. It was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you both. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.